Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions.
Thought came to me, what is a way to make it so easy, so compelling, and even fun that people can't not try it? And the thing that came to me was Name That Tune. Name That Tune, I guess there's a current version of it, but I remember it from my childhood. It was that game that people would guess these tunes and stuff. And there would be one part of the game show where contestants would kind of vie off back and forth saying, I could name that tune in 9 notes. And someone would say, I could name it in 7. I could name it in 6. Name that tune. And I thought, I wonder if there's a sweet spot for getting the conversation started that could be as few as however many words. So I started writing notes and listing. I came home to my family and told them about this idea. I put a big poster sheet of paper on the table with markers. And I said, whenever you hear a phrase that gets a conversation started, make a note of it. Let's see what happens. And it turns out there was a sweet spot. 4 words consistently was just enough to get it started, was low enough that people were willing to try it, especially when you use that gamification part of your brain. They're like, I wonder if this would work. We're past fear now, and we're wanting to try to see if we're right. That dopamine hit is just waiting to show up in our lives. So then they would try it. And the other thing that was really interesting is when they got their thought condensed to just a few words, 4, they came out clearer and people understood what they had to say. And there was a lot less defensiveness and more engagement. So I started working with that, and ultimately that's where the book came up. I wrote the book. If you're looking for what are the 4 words, there's a lot of 4 words, and there's a lot of them in here. And the fun of it is when I talk to people who've read the book, they tell me they'll tell me their 4 words. And we also joke about there's one chapter in the book about, let's be honest, there's some 4 words that are just never going to go well. Over my dead body doesn't work very well. It's not my job, doesn't work very well. So it's not a guaranteed, but it is a strategy and a concept. So at a minimum, it's a book. But I really want people to think about, if there were a way to say something in as few as 4 words, what could I say? And I had this one guy who said, sorry, but I just don't get it. Tell me what. He was a realtor. And he said, I just don't understand how this would work for me. Can you give me an example? And I said, yeah, how about this? Let's have a conversation. And his whole face just sort of melted, and he sat back and he thought, he goes, that would really work. I said, give it a try. So he became a convert with just, let's have a conversation. Really simple.
So here's a question for you that you may not want to answer.
Oh, gosh.
What are your favorite first 4 words?
Well, one of them is, let's have a conversation. But I really, really like the phrases that end with a question mark. Not what were you thinking, but, what do you think? Where do we agree? How do we start? Those simple phrases to engage the other person, not only engage them, but also brings down the emotional level of response, gets us listening to each other, and invites the dialogue. That's where you start building trust, engagement, all kinds of new ideas, and safety. And safety, particularly in a corporate environment, is so critical and hard won.
Do you mind
So
if I give you a
go ahead.
five letter one or 5 word one?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
How do we win with you?
I love it. And I was working. Where's the win-win?
Mhm.
Is my four-word version of that, but it's the same thing. And I love that you gave me the five-letter one because this is just a concept to get it started. It's not a rule book. There will not be any. And this one teacher who was going to 3 lashes with a wet noodle. That was her response if you didn't follow the rules. There won't be even that. But if it gets you thinking, and then wanting to try it out, it's the
Mhm.
invitation to experiment and refine where you really start to get difference.
Well, I think it's important simply because the thing that stops people is the not knowing, right? The fear of what they don't know. It's the single
Right.
greatest fear. And what happens, I think, with a lot of executives and a lot of people that are in leadership is they go to have that difficult conversation. They go to have that conversation that they believe is going to be this sort of potential eruption of emotion, right? And they don't want to go there. They're afraid of what they're going to find, and so they don't ask. And I think it's incredibly important to have something like your book available to them to where they can read it, they can look at it, and they go, okay, how do I pre-plan this? How do I start
Yeah.
the conversation?
That's it.
Because once you get it,
That's exactly it.
yeah, once you get it going, you're good, right? Like I have my kids are 24 and 26, and I shared with them independently, not together, but independently, each of them. I shared with them. I said, if I gave you one piece of advice that I would want you to follow every single day, it would be, I want you to go to your Microsoft Word, and I want you to type out a line at the top and a line at the bottom in the largest font you can. And the first line would be stay in curiosity, and the bottom line would be stay out of judgment. And I'd want you to
Wow. That's great.
and I'd want you to put it up in front of where you work every single day. So when you're on the phone, you remember this. When you're typing, you remember this. When you're thinking, you remember this. Okay? Because we're not going to get anywhere talking at people. We're just not. And we had a guest on our podcast a couple of months ago, and in his book, he writes about this corporation that had this annual meeting. They hired him to come in and talk to them. So he was the guest speaker, right? Keynote. And the CEO got up, and he was this gentleman, our guest, was on off stage at the side of the stage. And the CEO gets up and he says, "Hey," he says, "welcome to our annual meeting. I'm going to introduce our speaker here in a minute. But I wanted to go through a slide deck real quick and just catch you up to speed with how we're doing as a company." So he starts in on the slide deck. Within seconds of him doing that, all of the top C-suite executives that all work directly for him were all on their phones. Like our attention
Wow.
span now, average, is 8
Yes.
seconds.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, if that CEO had just done one thing, if he had just said, I have a slide deck here. I'm going to introduce the speaker in a minute. I have a slide deck here. I want to catch you up to speed on what our current, how we did this year. But I have a question for you before we get started. You're all out there on the front lines. You're the ones that are all out there making us successful. How do you think we did this year? Anybody want to take a guess? Anybody want to guess what that slide deck's going to say?
Yeah.
Get somebody to raise their hand. Get somebody to interact with you. And none of them have their phones out. I guarantee it. Because they all want to know who that is that raised their hand and who it is that's interacting with the CEO. And they want to know what they're going to say.
Well, and they're also anticipating that any one of them might get called on at this point.
Guaranteed. Guaranteed,
Yeah.
right?
Wake up.
It's right. But they're engaged. They're
Yes.
engaged. And that's the
Absolutely.
thing I'm talking about is those 4 words, those first 4 words, I believe, absolutely need to have a question mark behind them, right?
Love it.
You have a
Yeah.
second, right?
Yeah.
We talk for a second. Would it be okay if we talked about whatever? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And it's literally all you're doing is you're asking them, how are we doing with you? How are you doing here? What can we do better?
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly. And that's, I work a lot with women leaders, and that's also one of the places where they end up diffusing some of their credibility because they're not getting in there fast enough and sharp enough. There's all the preamble of, well, I don't know if this is what you're asking about, but here's the idea. We're
Right,
already gone.
right,
They're already got the phones out. One thing that you mentioned is I agree that fear is the number one reason why people don't enter the conversation. I'm afraid of the conflict. I'm
mhm,
afraid how it's going to happen. I'm afraid I'm not going to say it right. I'm afraid it's going to get worse. I just don't have the time for that. And the other thing is not so much that they already know how it's going to turn out or that they're afraid of the uncertainty, but one of the biggest barriers is they've already decided. You asked me earlier about mindset. This is one of the places where it comes up. They've already decided exactly that what they're going to do is going to make things worse and how the other person's going to respond and behave. So why bother?
right.
So I don't think people even process fully the uncertainty because they've already made their minds up about what that eye roll meant, what that expression meant, what that, everything.
Yeah,
And it's the curiosity. I love how you said that. The curiosity and the openness to discovery that really says, I value you
yeah.
and I want to learn from you.
Yeah, because you reach out and you're vulnerable. I know this is rough, right? Leaders don't want to be vulnerable. Leaders want to walk in the door, they want everybody to fear them, and they want to just shout out the order and they want everybody to obey it to the letter, no matter what.
Mhm.
Okay. Well, that's a leader I would submit to you that's insecure. That's a leader that I would submit to you doesn't want to hear the feedback. Okay? Either because they don't have the time, they don't want to make the effort, they don't care. Okay? They might care, but they're scared to death of what's going to happen if they
Right,
literally sit and ask. Okay?
right.
And I would submit to you that's the disconnect. That's the biggest. And if you're going to retain talent, if you're going to retain the people that you currently have and not have them go down the street for $4 more per year, okay? And then you're going to have to rehire that position. You're going to have to retrain that person. You got turnover, right? It's going to cost you way more money. They'll work for you
Absolutely.
if you connect with them. They'll work for you for less money than the company down the street that doesn't connect with their people.
Exactly.
But you
I
got to
always
be
say
willing to connect.
leadership, yeah, leadership is the relationship.
Yeah,
So if you're not starting to build the relationship, you're not going to have people who are following you or trusting you or staying with you, as you're saying. Couldn't
totally
agree
agree.
more.
Totally
Yeah.
agree. Right.
Yeah.
And I'm the king of the stupid question. You know why? Because I stay out of judgment. I don't prejudge
Right.
questions that I ask, right? But I ask questions that 99% of people won't even touch. They won't go anywhere near it because they prejudged it and went, "Oh, that'll sound silly if I ask that." Or that'll ruin my credibility if I ask that. You know what? If you don't ask, your credibility is gone anyway.
Well, and that's why it's interesting too. I agree that sometimes it is the simple, straightforward question that is the best question to ask. But the uncertainty that comes before it from some people that I work with, obviously not you, but um, this is probably a stupid question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Mhm.
And it's like, just ask a stupid question because it's
Right.
probably the same one that everyone else has. They just don't have the courage and integrity to ask it in a straightforward way that you're prepared to demonstrate.
Right.
We need more of that modeled.
Here's what's interesting. And I find this fascinating. By the way, I'm writing a book on the power of questions, just so you know. Right.
Oh, great. All right.
Right. So this is what I find interesting. If you're sitting with somebody that you work with and you're in a private conversation and you say to them, this is probably a stupid question, but let me ask it anyway. They won't answer that question honestly because they don't want you to look stupid.
That's
Hello?
a good point.
You got to stop. You got to stop this telegraphing and all this other junk that you layered this with. Just care enough to ask. Just care enough to ask. Okay. I had a conversation last night, and I wasn't going to talk about this, but I had a conversation last night. It was one of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had in my life. And it was with one of my friends who is who lost a friend of his. A mutual friend of ours passed away a couple of months ago. That friend's oldest son is just imploding, absolutely massively upset with everybody. He's breaking things. He's violent. I mean, you wouldn't believe all the things that are going on. And I said to him last night when we met about business. We're getting a business together. And I asked him about it, about the boy, and he said, we don't know what to do. We don't know what to do. We don't know what to say. Right. And I said, okay, you got to go ask. You got to go sit with him and you got to go ask. How are you doing?
Yeah.
How are you processing the fact that you lost your dad 2 months ago? Now, what you don't know is his dad was larger than life. His dad was one of those people that just was one of the toughest people you've ever met in your life. Okay. He was larger than life. I don't know how else to explain it. He was larger than life. He was incredibly successful because of it. And he didn't go to the doctor. He was sick for 4 weeks, didn't go to the doctor, and he passed away.
Wow.
And his son is upset with him because his dad didn't go to the doctor. Okay. But if the son doesn't have anybody sitting with him asking him, how are you feeling? How are you dealing with this? What's going on with you? Why are you so upset? Why are you breaking things? Why are you violent? You with me? One of the most meaningful conversations I've ever had with anybody in my life, I had last night. And it was all about the power of questions. And it was all about how you have to go there. Okay. Same thing's true in leadership. Parenting, this person is going to be their this boy's guardian. And this is going to be a parenting relationship. Okay. He's his godfather, by the way. And I explained to him, I said, you're the one that dad picked. You're it. You're the male figure in his life that dad endorsed. Dad picked you. You have to go fix this. Okay. And the only way you're going to do it is to ask him questions. Do you know I'm putting together a list of questions for him that I'm emailing to him to sit down and go over with this boy?
Yeah.
Because it's so uncomfortable and it's so wrought with emotion. And right. The thing is, he's going to help this boy heal. And it's literally going to come from the questions that he asks. Literally. And if you're in leadership, your people need you to help them with whatever it is they're going through, and everybody's going through something.
Right.
Most
That's
of the
for
time,
sure.
Most of the time when they're suffering, and you and I talked about the fires in Los Angeles, right? The wildfires and stuff before we started. People suffer in silence. But here's what the secret is. They're dying, literally dying for you to give them the green light to share their story, to share what's going on with them. You just have to care enough to ask.
Yeah. May I add one thing?
Absolutely.
To that? Because I agree completely. And it's interesting. You're telling a story you weren't going to tell, and you'd be surprised at how close to home that story hits, which is oftentimes how things work.
Yeah.
And, the question I would also have for your friend is, and how can you make yourself comfortable while you sit with the silence? Because I think the answers to those questions, as good as the questions are, it may take some time to produce the response. And he may think that he's failing in asking these questions that didn't work. I asked this question, it didn't work. I asked this question, he just got madder. I've had that kid, and just being present in the silence after asking the question is really, really hard.
Yeah.
But that's where I think the answers are likely gonna come. That's safety. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Thanks for sharing that.
The best thing about it is, because here's the thing. I believe this kid's going to kill himself. I believe that he's on track to commit suicide, and I'm scared that that's going to happen. And he is too. This friend of mine is too.
Yeah.
And afterwards, after we finished, he sent me a text message. He goes, "That was one of the coolest things ever. Thank you so much." we really connected. Like, we're really good friends, but we became better friends yesterday.
Yeah.
And this was one of those things where, because I've raised children, okay, I understand what a 14-year-old boy needs to an extent, right? And I also know that none of us knows for sure, because we have to ask. We can't know until we hear from them, but we got to ask.
Right.
And so, yeah, so I wasn't even going to talk about this, and I'm talking about it, um,
Yeah.
but it's the point I'm getting at is, it's incredibly important for those of us in leadership and those of us that are parents, which I believe is sacred leadership. It's incredibly important that we ask. It's incredibly important that we sit. And a few years ago, I took my son to breakfast, and we were in Nebraska. He graduated from the University of Nebraska at Lincoln, and he was in his senior year. And my mother had a conversation with him and said, I think he's homesick. And so we brought home to him. We loaded up and came and hung out with him for a week, and wore out our welcome. And he got completely tired of us, the whole thing. And I said, hey, I want to take you to breakfast. The girls want to sleep in Thursday morning. I want to take you to breakfast. I'll take you to your favorite restaurant. Okay. So we go to his favorite restaurant. Naturally, it's a restaurant that makes crepes, because this kid is crepes nuts, right? Has been his mother was that way when she was pregnant with him too. She loved crepes when it
That's funny.
happens. So take him to this place. And I said, there's a question I've been wanting to ask you. If there were no limitations, money was no object, and this was a perfect world, what would you do after you graduated from college? And he said, I would invest in real estate with you. Now, this is a kid, Tucker, who told me his entire life growing up that he wanted nothing to do with real estate. Nothing. You could have knocked me over with a feather. And so I
Yeah,
asked him,
I
I said,
bet.
can I ask you why? It's one of the most vulnerable moments of my life, right? Can I ask you why?
Hmm.
And he said, yeah. He said, you're never more magnetic than you are when you're talking about investing in real estate. And he said, and I want to work with you.
Wow.
He goes, I don't know anybody on this
Wow.
with a heartbeat that wouldn't want to work with you.
Wow.
That blew me away.
Yeah. Way to go,
Those are,
Dad.
but those are the types of questions that you
Yes.
have to ask, because he's
Yeah.
getting a degree in mechanical engineering and a minor in biomed. Okay.
Yeah.
Turns out
Yeah.
that's not what he wants to do for a living.
Hmm.
So he's
Well,
coming down. He's coming down to
is he
join
working
us.
with?
He's coming down
That's awesome.
to come to work with us.
That's awesome.
Yeah, crazy.
And it'll surprise you how his education will absolutely make perfect sense. When you look at it,
Yeah.
there will be things he learned that don't seem obvious. But both my husband's also an attorney. We do the look back on our careers, and we both have the careers in law that no one told us about. But when you do the look back, they all sort of made sense, and it'll be fun what you discover from him as well.
Yeah.
But back in a leadership standpoint, I just think too often people have already made their minds up about a person or what they want to do or where they want to go or what a right move looks like, or here's a great opportunity for you, and they've never asked that question.
Yeah.
And it's those assumptions that really are the undoing, not only of meaningful feedback and engagement, but the undoing of the relationship and the trust.
Yeah.
And so if we could, I like your, no judgment line, but if we could just kind of catch ourselves to be a little bit more curious and lean into that, just as you were talking about, using some simple phrases, um, it can really make a powerful difference. And there's, people don't remember what you say, they remember how you made them feel.
Mhm.
When you give space for someone to honestly show up with what they think is true, that is a gift unlike any other.
Yeah.
And to honor it by listening is key.
Yeah. Totally agree. Totally
Yeah.
agree. I cannot thank you enough for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. This has
Thank
been
you so
absolutely,
much.
and everybody needs to go get the first four words.
The first four
The first four
words.
words. And where can they get it?
They can find it easily on Amazon, and you might want to add my name to it, J. Tucker Miller. Otherwise, you might get a lot of preschool books. So there's a lot of preschool books about the first four words. That's not this one. This one shows up under business and leadership, but it's about a lot more than that. And thank you for giving me an opportunity to share it with your audience.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out calendly.com/Rio760.